Hey, everybody, it's Fred Diamond, the host of the Love, Hope, Lyme podcast and the author of Love, Hope, Lyme, What Family Members, Partners, and Friends Who Have a Chronic Lyme Survivor Need to Know. It's the holiday season, so if you would like signed copies of Love, Hope, Lyme, reach out to me via Facebook Messenger, go to freddiamond.com or reach out to me via LinkedIn. I've sent over a couple hundred copies signed of Love, Hope, Lyme. If you would like them sent to your friends and family members as your holiday gifts, reach out to me. Of course, the book is available on Amazon and it's always free. The e-version is always free for Lyme survivors. Reach out to me via Facebook as well. Again, enjoy today's Love, Hope, Lyme podcast. All right, welcome to another episode of the Love, Hope, Lyme podcast. My name is Fred Diamond. Of course, I'm the author of Love, Hope, Lyme, What Family Members, Partners, and Friends Who Love a Chronic Lyme Survivor Need to Know. Thanks for listening to today's show. Hey, quick by the way, we transcribe every Love, Hope, Lyme episode that we do. You can go to freddiamond.com and hit the button that says Love, Hope, Lyme, and you could read today's transcription with Nicole Bell, plus all the other episodes that we've done as well. You can find my book, Love, Hope, Lyme, on Amazon, as of course you can find Nicole's book, which we'll be talking about today. I made the e-version of the book free for chronic Lyme survivors. So if you're a chronic Lyme survivor and you want to get the e-version, the PDF, reach out to me either via freddiamond.com or go to Facebook and friend me, or go to LinkedIn. I spend a lot of time on LinkedIn and I'd be happy to send you the e-version. Nicole, I've added like 2,000 friends on Facebook since I've published the book, and some of these people have become just wonderful people in my life. So when I wrote the book, I met some amazing leaders in the Lyme community, doctors, medical practitioners, people who run charities, and they've all helped me understand what living with Lyme is all about. And I also read a lot of the first-person books, books written by famous actresses. Tommy Hilfiger's daughter, wrote a book, Allie, about her battle with Lyme. Jody Hudson, who wrote My Promise to Alex. So they've all helped me understand what living is Lyme about. And again, on the podcast, I've invited them to share their insights into how you can support those you love. Now, if you're a chronic Lyme survivor, hopefully the podcast will help you understand how you can let your family and friends support you, how you needed to be supported. And Nicole, a lot of people have said that to me. So I'm very excited for today's show. We're talking to Nicole Bell, and Nicole is the author of What Lurks in the Woods. And I read the book, of course. It's a fascinating story. Nicole, did you have Lyme, by the way? I know your husband obviously did, which we'll talk about, but did you also have Lyme at all?
Not that I'm aware of.
So all right, and I hope you don't, of course. So we're talking to Nicole Bell. Now, Nicole talks about what happened to her husband, and it's quite interesting. She's an engineer by trade. Congratulations with your degrees from MIT and Duke. And as you read the book, you could tell how you went about it from a engineering perspective, trying to get to the root cause to understand what was going on with your husband, who also was a successful engineer as well, correct?
Correct, yes.
And one of the key lessons from this book is that the disease can affect anyone, rich, poor, successful, happy, various professions. I've met so many people, Nicole, who can't work anymore, people who are medical, psychiatrists, psychologists, social workers, who, because of the debilitating nature of the disease, aren't able to work. All right, before we get into the questions, tell us about the book a little bit. Tell us a little bit about your journey, what led you, how you discovered what was going on with Russ, and what led you to write this beautiful book.
Well, I mean, in Russ's journey, we figured out that something was going on and that he was sick around 2016. And, it really started presenting with mood disorders and then eventually memory issues. And when the memory issues started, that was when I knew that he was sick. And we went to doctors, and I had him tested for Lyme disease as one of the first things. That's because he was a hunter, he was in the woods, he was always doing the landscaping in our yard, all the things that, and Lyme disease pops up a lot when you have cognitive abilities. And we had him tested, and he tested negative. And then we went down, they referred us to a neurologist, and he ended up with a diagnosis of early onset Alzheimer's disease. And that was obviously devastating and didn't make any sense. And as you mentioned, I'm an engineer and I like root cause, and it was a huge disconnect in my brain. And so fast forward, we eventually, through happenstance, through some family interactions, figured out that it was Lyme disease. I had him retested. He tested positive. And that was kind of where our treatment journey began. And the genesis of the book really was as part of my coping mechanism, because being a caregiver is super hard, as we'll talk about. And my coping mechanism was to start journaling, which I had never done in my life before. I mean, I've written a lot for my career, but more technical writing as an engineer, and getting things through the FDA because I work in medical devices and so forth. But I'd never just written to help me and process. And so I started journaling. And then as I went through this journey and learned about tick-borne illness, I realized that this was something that I needed to turn into a book, not only for me, which that was actually the first motivator for me and my two children, who are now 12 and 9, but to just process the journey we had been through and to make order of the chaos. But also, like, all the learnings and the failures and the successes and the things that we did along the way, I wanted to share it so that somebody didn't have to slog through it. If one person could pick up my book and say, wow, I'm not going to do that, or I am going to do this, and it makes their journey that much easier, then that brings meaning to the whole experience.
Yeah, that's a great. I want to ask you a couple of quick follow-up questions. Again, I must have read almost every book that came out on Lyme disease. There were a bunch of books that were written, well, not a bunch, but a couple written by parents who had children with Lyme. I believe your book, if it wasn't the first, it was definitely one of the only books written by a spouse about their journey with their particular, with their spouse. When I wrote my book, it was about what I had discovered similarly to you about Lyme. Quick question. So he was originally diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Did he have Alzheimer's, or was it 100% Lyme?
So yes and yes. So I believe the way that I think of Alzheimer's is a symptom, right? Alzheimer's is like fever, where it is basically certain things that happen in your brain that lead to neurodegeneration. But what is the cause of that neurodegeneration? And if you look deeply into the Alzheimer's researchers, there can be multiple causes. It can be a metabolic disorder, it can be hormone disorders, or it can be infection. And infection, if you look at, everybody talks about Alzheimer's, you may have heard of amyloid beta. It's big in the news right now. What is amyloid beta? It is the product of your immune system. So what is your immune system doing? Well, it's fighting off an infection or something that it doesn't like in your brain. And so when people say, did he have Alzheimer's? I say yes. When people say, did he have Lyme? I say yes. And he also had Bartonella, and he had heavy metals in his brain and things that lead to neurodegeneration. So I believe that it was the root cause of his illness, and that the answer to both questions is yes.
So the reason that's a great answer. One of the challenges with people have Lyme is that it shows up as other things. And of course, Lyme is known as the great imitator. And your situation was one of the rare ones where I heard about showing up as Alzheimer's. Usually it's arthritis is a very common one. And, a lot of doctors aren't educated on Lyme. Even today, I did an interview as part of the series with Dr. Daniel Kinderlehrer, who created a lot of the curriculum for the iLads organization to educate doctors on Lyme disease. And we did the interview in 2023, and he still said that so many doctors are so ignorant of Lyme, so they'll diagnose what they know. And Lyme easily looks like we said before, arthritis or fatigue, and it's always been misdiagnosed. How many doctors did you go to, just curiously, before it was diagnosed with Lyme?
So we went to 4 different neurologists, plus we went to 2 different functional medicine practices. And I would flip the script. I know I've heard the great imitator multiple times, but I would say I'd flip the script on that. And I would say many diagnoses are really just symptoms, right? Arthritis is inflammation, right? They're like, if you have, it's what's causing that issue in the first place. And so a lot of the diagnoses, they're idiopathic, right? It means they have no idea what's actually causing it. And so I think there's some of it where we have these disease categories that are really not based upon root cause. And that's the fundamental challenge. And the next layer of medicine is trying to figure out what's causing a lot of these illnesses.
So how was Russ as you were going through this? As he was discovering what was going on, was he aware as well? Or how was, again, as we're talking today, we're talking about what family members, partners, and friends need to know when you love somebody with chronic Lyme disease. Give us some insights, if you could, of how he was as this was happening, and as you were discovering all this.
Yeah, well, his first manifestations were all mood-based, right? He became depressed, he became irritable, he became nasty, and even verbally abusive. I thought we were headed for divorce. And then as I realized that it was his memory that, was also suffering, was when I realized that there was some pathology there. And it wasn't just our life situation, it wasn't just his unhappiness, it was something pathological. But then when I realized that, I had to convince him of that, right? I had to convince him, who was belligerent and depressed and not happy, that something was going on with his brain. And that was not an easy task. That was like, hey, I think you need to go to a doctor because you're not thinking clearly, is not an easy discussion to have with somebody who's not acting as a rational person, which he wasn't at the time. Yeah. And so it was a challenge. And there were times when he was 100% on board with treatment. And there were times when he fought me tooth and nail every step in the way. And it's a lot of ups and downs as part of the process.
Yeah. All right, let's get some of the questions here. So what are 3 things that you would recommend, or that you want family members, partners, and friends, what should they need to know about what their loved one is going through?
Yeah, this is critical. I mean, I think the first thing I would say is that chronic Lyme is real, right? That's a critical thing to understand. And I think most people probably listen to this podcast will take that as a given, but at some point in your journey, you're going to question it. I know I did. I mean, and the reason for that is there's so much misinformation out there, right? I'm doing a project with Lyme Warrior. I just did a video on the 7 myths in Lyme disease. Yeah. And it's true, because there's so much misinformation out there, and you're going to hear it. There's going to be a doctor or a family member or even a news article or something that just makes you question what you're doing. And I'm on the right path. And maybe you don't have positive test results because the tests are terrible and you just don't know. And so what I want people to know, as you mentioned, I approached this as an engineer. And so as part of my caregiving journey and as part of my post-caregiving journey, I've really dive into the science and trying to figure this out. And there is a ton of research out there that has emerged over the last decade or so that shows that these infections are stealthy, that they're difficult to treat, that not everybody gets rid of the infections with treatment. And that leads to a host of chronic dysfunction. And so the disease is real. You will question yourself, but know that there's the research out there supporting it. The second thing that I would say is that getting well takes work. It is hard. And it's not one of those things. We have this expectation in society, like we go to the doctor, we get a pill, we come out and we're better. And that is just not the case. Yeah. It's not the case with chronic illness. You're going to need to make lifestyle changes in diet and sleep. You may have to pick up meditation and mindfulness practices. You're going to have to do supplements and treatments and medications and things that you've never heard of. And it is like literally a full-time job, especially if you've been sick for a while. I mean, one doctor kept reiterating, it took you a long time to get this sick. It's going to take a long time to get well. And so it takes work. It's not easy. And you have to be prepared to kind of put in that effort. And then the third thing that I would say is that it's a roller coaster. Like it is an absolute roller coaster that I was not prepared for. I mean, there are times when you feel like, I got this. We are good. We are on the right path. You know, he or she is getting better and everything is great. And then there's going to be times when you are sitting crying in your closet floor. And I mean, I literally have a spot in the back of my closet where I would sit and cry. And then later I graduated to a chair in my room. I called it my crying chair because it's just like, it is a roller coaster. It is an up and, you know, there are ups and downs that you could have never fathomed or imagined. And so those are the three things. Chronic Lyme is real, getting well takes work, and then it's a roller coaster. And you just need to be prepared for that because nobody expects this to happen to them. It comes like a big fat baseball bat in the face that you just have to deal with.
So the big fat baseball bat in the face, I agree with you. A lot of people say that obviously they change. As a matter of fact, I even have one of the first, in the first few pages of my book, Love, Hope, Lyme, I posted a quote that I actually saw on the Lyme Warrior, one of the Lyme Warrior groups, where someone said, I miss me, I miss the old me. Was there a moment, I've never asked this question before, was there a moment when you realized, do you recall that moment when you realized something was up, that your husband, something happened to him, that something was totally different? Or was it just kind of like over time that you just began to notice these symptoms? Or do you recall the moment when you realized something was different?
Oh, the moment when I realized that it was an illness and it wasn't just depression, and I don't want to say just depression and minimize that because I know how important that is, but when I realized that it was more than something we could do with therapy
Mm,
and that it was something we needed to get treatment for, was when I was at work and I got a call from our house alarm company.
mm,
And the alarm is blaring in the background, and and then Russ calls me and he can't shut off the alarm, and the alarm company is wondering if somebody's breaking in, and I couldn't figure out what's going on. And I'm like, what's the problem? And then I get home and I plug in the alarm code, and Russ was telling me it was broken. It wasn't. Everything was working fine, and I'm confused, like I can't figure it out. And then all of a sudden it just dawned on me, I don't think he can remember the 4-digit code.
mm.
Like I honestly don't think he can remember something that's been the same for years. And then that was the moment I started noticing, and I started looking, and I would notice that he was losing his keys more. I would notice that, he kept saying that I didn't tell him something, and we would argue, right? Like, I told you the time to pick up the kids, and no, you didn't. Yes, I did. And then that was happening a lot because he was forgetting.
Yeah.
And that was when I knew that we had a bigger problem.
I have a question for you specifically then. One thing I learned when I started this journey was that someone had stated that 75 to 80% of relationships when someone has a chronic illness will terminate. And usually in 95% of the cases, it's because of the spouse who says, I didn't buy, this is not what I wanted. You weren't this person anymore. They didn't understand a lot of the things, the neurological things that you're talking about. Again, we're talking to Nicole Bell, the author of What Lurks in the Woods. But obviously you stuck it out. How did you said you had a place where you went to cry, and then you had a chair that you went to cry. And you do talk about this in the book a little bit, but talk about how you coped, seeing that this person who, you had 2 children with,
Mhm.
obviously you both are, I'm going to guess, of similar intellect based on what I've been able to see and read, happy, successful couple, big house, nice house, etc. What were some things that you did to cope, to make it through this journey?
I mean, writing was a key portion of that. I mean, honestly, the journaling and the the moment to self-reflect and to just put it on the page. So I describe myself as a ruminator. I like to think about things, and that's how I've been successful as an engineer. Is, when you have a problem, you just keep thinking about it, and you think about it in different ways, and you try and solve it, and eventually that solution becomes apparent. But in chronic illness, that solution may not become apparent. It is hard, and you can't necessarily figure it out, especially on your own, right? When you're just thrown into this. I didn't know about Lyme disease. I had to learn. And so writing things down, and then eventually I started talking through it with other people. Like I was too insular, and I kept things to myself too much at the beginning. But as I opened up, and started talking about my journey with my brother, who I talk about a lot in the book, and some of my key
Mhm.
friends and my parents, it became an outlet for me to just feel normal, because nothing feels normal when you're going through something this traumatic.
Yeah.
And so being open and just trying to get that outlet of emotions rather than stuffing it in, which frankly is my knitting, is just, I can handle it. I've got this, right? I didn't. And so getting that out. And then also, meditation and breathing were huge for me. Russ, as I had mentioned earlier, he could be combative, and it's really easy to escalate along with, right? I'm from Boston. You're going to fight and get in my face. I'm going to get right back, right? That's not going to work. And so I would have to remove myself from the situation. I smelled lavender. I had a little bottle of essential
Mm.
oils. I would just sniff lavender and just like try and reset my mindset, because, I had to realize that what I was doing wasn't working.
It's interesting with your background and your success and what you do. And I kind of went about it the same way. It's like, okay, well, we're going to do this, and then let's report back in 2 weeks, and we'll check our progress. And like a business problem, you can solve almost any business problem. Some may take longer than others, but you bring the team together, you get in front of a whiteboard, you map out what's the problem, what's the solution, what are the action steps we need to take, who needs to be involved. Good. In 2 weeks, either the problem's going to be solved, or we need different resources, if you will. With Lyme, it truly ain't like that, and there's no way that you're going to be prescriptive in solving what your loved one is going through. What shouldn't family members, partners, and friends be doing? What have you seen over the last couple of years since you've started this journey that they're doing that they shouldn't be doing from what you learned?
Yeah, I think that my answer to that would be, don't expect your person to be who they were. Don't expect them to be who they were. And I think that was a lot of the root of my disconnect, is I would say in my head, like, why are you being so mean to me? Why don't you understand what I'm trying to tell you? Why are you, confused, or why did you forget? And because I'm thinking of him in the frame of reference of who he was. He was an extremely high powered executive who we always had very logical discussions. We never fought, like all the things, but he wasn't that person anymore. Yeah. He wasn't that person anymore. His brain was literally, rewired and in a different place. And so he had Bartonella, and that made him angry, with rage and irrational thoughts that I would take upon myself. Well, why are you being so mean to me? What did I do to make you say that to me? And it's because I was in the wrong frame of reference. He was in a different place, and I needed to stop thinking of him the way that he was and meet him where he was at that moment.
Yeah, that's a great point. What should people expect again once they, you're talking about a lot of things that the caregiver, and I it's interesting. I never used the word caregiver before, but let's just use that as a general term. And you're absolutely right. It's the person that you're dealing with now. They're not the person who you met. They're not the person you might have spent the first 10, 15 years with in your life. They're a completely different person, and it is the Lyme that is doing this. What should the loved ones, what should they be aware of? What should they be expecting as their loved one who has chronic Lyme continues to go through their journey?
I think I would say that, as the caregiver, that your health is going to suffer too, right? Like that is something that I had to learn the hard way, right? And I actually worked with a doctor. He was very wise. He said that when he takes on a new chronic patient, he looks at the patient and he says, I will take on your case. But then he looks at the caregiver that came with him and said, but only if you become a patient too. And, the reason for that is, as I said, it's a roller coaster, right? But the roller coaster, you go to a roller coaster, it's over in a minute, 2 minutes, whatever, right? But this is like a roller coaster that's an Ironman length, right? So you're on this journey for a while, and it is emotionally intense. And you may be able to get through that and power through it for a week, a month, even a year, right? But chronic Lyme can go on for years. I've met people who've had this disease for decades. And nobody can handle that kind of stress. And so if you don't take care of yourself, and if you don't understand how to cope with some of the stress and how to manage what you're trying to basically compensate for, then you're going to become a patient too, and you're not going to be able to help anybody. And so that's one of the things as I've come through on the other side is really managing my health proactively and unpacking the trauma that occurred and realizing how much of that was stored in my body. Like you have to prevent yourself from becoming a patient. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to help anybody.
Yeah. We're talking with Nicole Bell. She's the author of What Lurks in the Woods. Nicole, before I ask you for your final tip, your final bit of advice, when did your husband pass away again?
It was January of 2023. So a little over 2022, sorry, a little over a year ago.
Yeah. So how are you doing?
I'm doing well. I mean, it's taken a lot of work. I mean, writing the book was a huge part of my healing journey. I've also turned to things like breath work and, health and yoga and so forth to help with the physical aspects of going through this journey. But my kids are well. I'm kind of doing what I can on the advocacy side to raise awareness and help people. And that brings meaning to everything that happened. And so, I mean, obviously we miss Russ terribly, but I'm glad that he's at peace because his journey was rough.
Yeah.
And we're doing the best that we can to honor him on a daily basis.
Yeah. If you don't mind my asking, is your career back on track, or are you using your engineering? Are you in product management? Is that going to be, progressing for the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, so instead of going back to what I was doing previously, I've decided to kind of stay a little bit more flexible. So I'm actually doing consulting.
Mhm.
And so I've worked in medical devices for the last half of my career. And I've always been a startup and entrepreneurial person. And so I basically do about half of my time kind of in traditional medical devices, anything that's interesting where there's a new challenge in team. And then I've been fortunate to spend about half of my time in tick-borne illness, working with advocacy groups, with companies that are in the space, really trying to help fix the problems. There's a lot of challenges in diagnostics. There's a lot of challenges in raising money and other things that we need to fund the research. I've got some awareness initiatives that I've done with Lyme Warrior. So I spend about half my time on that, and then about half my time just kind of with what I spent my career on. And it's been a nice transition.
I just want to, before we ask you for your final question, first of all, I want to congratulate you on the book. Obviously, 10 years ago, you weren't sitting around planning on writing a book and being an advocate for Lyme as almost nobody is, but I just want to acknowledge you. It is a beautiful book. I strongly recommend that people get their hands on it. What Lurks in the Woods. It's up on Amazon and all the usual places. And I just want to acknowledge you for putting yourself out there. Like I mentioned, I've increased my friend list by 2,000 people over the last 6 months since my book had come out. And, people, your willingness to share this, it's going to help a lot of people. It has helped a lot of people already. I've seen the interaction on Amazon. I saw the video that you're referring to, the myths video. So you're doing great work for a lot of people, and you're doing well yourself. So I just want to acknowledge you for that. So what's your final thought? Any final tips for family members, partners, and friends who love a chronic Lyme survivor?
I think that the most important lesson that I learned was to get good at asking for help, right? I mean, I think as a caregiver, your job is to basically fill the gap, right, of the person that you're caring for. So that person had a full-time life that they were living that they're not going to be able to do anymore. Then they also have this full-time job of getting well and doing all the things they need for Lyme. And then you have your full-time job and what you were doing before, your life. So, there's 3 full-time jobs in there, right, that need to get handled. And your loved one may not be able to do any of it. I mean, they may be able to do some, they may not be able to do any at times. And so there's 3 full-time jobs that need to get done. And it's unrealistic for you to expect that you can do all of it. And so instead of that word caregiver, you said, sometimes you don't use it, but I like to say, instead of thinking of yourself as a caregiver, think of yourself as a project manager, how you're going to fill the gap. Like, how am I going to use the tribe around me? How am I going to ask for help so that I can get all these things done? Because again, it's a roller coaster that is the length of an Ironman. And so you have to figure out a path that is sustainable, that helps you so that you don't implode and become a patient, so that your loved one gets the support you need. Don't be the person that kind of throws it all in the backpack like the Sherpa trying to carry it all up the mountain. Instead, think of yourself as a project manager. What's the gap, and how am I going to use the people around me to make sure that it's done in a sustainable way that can last through the duration?
All right. Once again, I want to thank Nicole Bell for being on the Love, Hope, Lyme podcast. My name is Fred Diamond.